Number 70, Cinderella. In the early days of the Walt Disney Corporation, animation was the name of the game. From early shorts starring Mickey to the first feature-length animated film, Snow White, Disney proved that animated storytelling could be just as engaging as live action, and even offered more freedom to create things that simply didn't exist in the real world. My, how the times have changed. With animation budgets ballooning into the hundreds of millions and advances in visual effects technology making them more realistic than ever, it's now actually cheaper to film a live-action movie. So here we are with the first in a long line of planned live-action remakes of Disney's animated classics. Now, the cynic in me says that this is just a nostalgic cash grab, but my inner child sees something else. Wish fulfillment, which is kind of Disney's whole thing. At the time, the animated films were necessary because there was no other way to tell these stories. It wasn't possible to film actors and build sets that would even come close to what animation could do. In fact, color film barely even existed. So I have to imagine that people wish they could make one of these stories for real, and now they can. So it's really just the belated granting of some very old wishes. But what about this film specifically? It's okay. The visuals are spectacular as they should be, and most of the acting is pretty good, especially Cate Blanchett, who's just relishing every moment as the evil stepmother. But honestly, there isn't much more here than what you already know. A little more backstory to help pad the runtime, and an attempt is made at giving the prince something of a character, but these have little impact on the overall film. So it's worth watching even if you've seen the animated version, and for those who saw the animated classic and imagined it as something more, it might just be a wish come true. Number 69, Jurassic World. Some movies are just frustrating. They bombard you with inane dialogue and characters that can't possibly be intended to be liked, and in turn can't be enjoyed. But then they turn around and give you exciting action scenes that are full of tension and intrigue. Case in point, Jurassic World. A cast of wildly talented actors are forced to say some of the dumbest lines ever written and play stereotypical characters that we've seen so many times before. So many plot points that simply make no sense whatsoever are given primary focus for entire scenes and then dropped with no explanation as obvious sequel bait. Conversely, there are some really great ideas being tossed around here. The possibilities of dinosaurs being unleashed on humanity are given a better examination than in, say, The Lost World, which makes for some really thrilling sequences. But as soon as it looks like the story is going in the right direction, something infuriatingly stupid happens again. This is a highly anticipated film, and it was always going to have trouble living up to its own hype, but this isn't merely underwhelming. At times it's actually bad, especially in its portrayal of female characters, which can only be described as antiquated and insulting. I don't really have to tell you whether or not to see this, because based on the box office numbers, everyone has already seen it. But if you haven't already, and you're not a diehard fan of the Jurassic Park franchise, you should probably sit this one out. Number 68, Southpaw. As long as people have been making movies, they've been making movies about boxing. This makes sense because two people punching each other as hard as they can is viscerally exciting and serves as the simplest metaphor for overcoming difficulty and facing challenges known to man. Honestly, who among us doesn't wish we could just punch our problems away? But when a story has been told time and time again, it gets harder to bring anything new to the screen, which is the major stumbling block for Southpaw. We've seen this story before, and there simply aren't enough facets to this film to make it feel like something fresh and new. And really, I didn't think the protagonist of this movie had much of a character arc. He's a decent person and a good family man to start with, if a little irresponsible, and by the end, he's still a good person that we want to root for. He's experienced tragedy but barely been changed by it. Usually in these kinds of movies, the hero's adjustments in the ring mirror their personal growth, but that's absent here. There are some great performances that outshine the material in this. Jake Gyllenhaal adds another accolade to a string of great work, and Forrest Whitaker turns in his finest performance in years. A little bit of visual flair and attempts at adding some grittiness make this watchable, but hardly essential viewing. If you really like boxing movies that try very hard to tug at your heartstrings, then have at it. Number 67, The Age of Adeline. I could say a whole bunch of stuff about humanity's fascination with the idea of immortality, stemming from our fear of our own corporeal impermanence, and our desire to live out the fantasy of eternal youth, if only to arrive at the conclusion that it would be more curse than blessing, and how we're better off for the transitory nature of what we call beauty in life. But you already knew all of that. Instead, we'll talk about the movie. This subject has been approached from every angle imaginable: action, adventure, comedy, tragedy, and especially romance. So how does this differentiate itself from its predecessors? Pretty camera work. No, really. I know it's cliche to say style over substance, but this is a prime example. Gratuitous slow motion, soft, muted lighting provide a feast for the eyes but starve the mind, as they only exist to remind the audience that someone put some hard work into making this film. Which is a shame, really, because the other parts aren't really that bad. It's a known commodity of a story, but it's well acted and ambitious to a fault. I might have liked it more if it hadn't tried so hard to make me think it was a good movie. It really comes down to direction. A good-looking movie with nothing new to say just doesn't register with me. I had the same problem with Unbroken last year, which boasted the talents of Roger Deakins and the Coen brothers, but the plot was so familiar I've taken to calling it Chariots on the River Kwai. So I guess what I'm saying is that something really good made me dislike The Age of Adeline because it served no purpose other than distraction. You wouldn't be wasting your time seeing it, but high expectations are likely to be left unmet. Number 66, While We're Young. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between satirizing something and celebrating it. In this film's case, the subject is hipster culture, at times highlighting the absurdity of the bohemian lifestyle exhibited by Adam Driver and Amanda Seyfried's characters, but alternatively reveling in it and showing the joy it seems to bring them and the middle-aged couple longing for lost youth, played by Ben Stiller and Naomi Watts. I guess it's up to interpretation, but I would have liked to see the film go one way or the other, and that's really a problem I found myself having with the whole movie. It's definitely a comedy, but just enough dramatic elements are introduced to warrant a dual genre billing, if only they had been more thoroughly explored. The humor itself is in the typical Noah Baumbach style, deriving comedy from drawn-out awkwardness that rarely pays off in actual punchlines, which is fine and certainly has an audience, but I've just seen it so many times that it's losing its appeal for me. The film does go a long way toward being a rewarding experience in the final act, as the midlife crisis themes are given a heartfelt denouement, and one particular scene that plays out in the climax of numerous movies takes a surprisingly funny turn here. If your tastes lean toward indie and twee humor, you'll have a good time, but I can't see fans of more traditional film styles getting too much out of watching this. Number 65, The Overnight. Sometimes it's best to stick to simplicity. I appreciate dense storytelling and multi-layered plots, but every now and then just letting characters interact and finding themselves in awkward situations can be all that's necessary to be entertaining and funny. That's really the entirety of this film. Two couples who only just met share an evening of dinner and drinking, and as the night goes along, it becomes apparent that the hosts have ulterior motives. But what works so well in this film is the familiar social dilemmas that arise. Something happens that makes one person uncomfortable, but rather than breaking their silence on the matter, they go along with the others to keep the social contract intact, until they find themselves way out of their comfort zone and seemingly too far down the road to turn back. This movie gets an additional boost from a great cast of actors who are equally talented comedically and in the more dramatic scenes. The film has one or two missteps with the pace as things start getting weird very early in the evening, and it almost becomes unreasonable that the guest wouldn't put a stop to it sooner. Also, a lot of the comedy comes from raunchy jokes and shock value, which have diminishing returns. But the short runtime helps to remedy these problems and give a fair amount of entertainment for those who can handle a little bawdy, dark humor. Number 64, 71. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one. It plays out like a considerably toned down version of The Raid Redemption, with a lone soldier trapped in a place where nearly everyone is hostile, anyone could be feigning sympathy to set a trap, and corruption runs rampant. But set against the backdrop of the escalating violence between the IRA and the British government, and shedding light on a piece of history that many people may not have paid much attention to, largely dependent on the writing and direction, which are both quite good. The film comes and goes with minimal impact and makes no qualms about its narrow appeal. If what I just described sounds like something you'd enjoy, you most likely will. If not, you most likely won't. Not a terribly surprising experience. I thought it would be a decent movie, and it was a decent movie. Number 63, Joy. Director David O. Russell's last three films have accumulated an astonishing 25 Oscar nominations combined, so any project with his involvement is sure to garner a lot of attention, and with it, a lot of scrutiny, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The pressure to succeed can be a great motivator, but it seems as though that pressure may have gotten to Russell, who has assembled another all-star cast here, only to blunder their way through an incomprehensible script, only hampered further by his fast-paced editing style. The rapid line delivery and hyper-realism that served Silver Linings Playbook well as an echo of the protagonist's bipolar disorder and made the twisty betrayals of American Hustle more surprising and urgent comes across as confused and unfocused here, which is a shame because this is an ambitious film that aims to reinvent the rags to riches story, so I can at least appreciate the chances it takes even if most of them don't pay off. I wanted so badly to like this movie, and there's certainly things to like about it. There's plenty of style and atmosphere to spare, but if there's any reason to watch Joy, it's for the performance of Jennifer Lawrence, again playing a great character in search of a better movie to be in. And I know this is a hollow victory, but this was the best movie Bradley Cooper was in this year. A misstep for David O. Russell was inevitable, evidenced by the fact that of those 25 Oscar nominations, there were only 3 wins, and all of those were for acting. Not a complete waste of time, but don't take any great pains to see it. Number 62, Goosebumps. I'm about to say something that's going to make me sound like some kind of weirdo. I didn't read Goosebumps books when I was a kid. I'll give you a second to process your feelings about that. You okay? Good. So it's safe to say that I don't know much about the subject, but I do know what Goosebumps is in general. But this does afford me the opportunity to judge this movie on its own merit instead of as an adaptation. And on its own merit, I think it's okay. There are a lot of recycled plot elements like the dorky best friend and the new kid in town that make it feel like you've seen this movie already and possibly even a long time ago. My biggest problem with the film is Jack Black's tragically misguided performance as R.L. Stine. His exaggerated pronunciation and constant scowling play like a character intended to be the villain in a movie for much younger kids. But aside from that and the cliches, there's a lot to like. The primary antagonist is suitably creepy, and most of the scenes with that character have a great atmosphere that's lacking in certain parts. Dylan Minnette turns in a solid performance as the boy hero of the story, and given the high volume of CGI, most of it is pretty good. There's not much else I can say about this other than it's nowhere near perfection. But if you like the books or just like something with a little bit of a spooky adventure feel, then this is a fairly clever and not too scary movie you might enjoy. For 61, The Good Dinosaur. For 2 decades now, Pixar has been one of the most influential production companies in the movie business. They've innovated and pioneered new technology and animation, as well as making some of the flat out best and most original films ever. They've constantly found new ways to entertain both kids and adults, while also teaching valuable lessons through unexpected means. Now, that's not to say they're perfect. They've had some serious misfires and some mediocre entries in their catalog as well. But they always come back with something that reminds us why we love Pixar. So even when the movie you just saw wasn't that good, there's still reason to be excited, because you know they're going to work even harder on the next one. In that respect, I guess you could say The Good Dinosaur gives me hope. Now, it's certainly not a bad film, but coming from the great imaginations of Pixar, it's a bit of a letdown because it feels like something I've seen before. There's a little of The Lion King in there, and The Land Before Time as well, but there's a heaping helping of Five Goes West. And while the animation is obviously great, it feels oddly mismatched. The backgrounds and environments are incredibly detailed and realistic, but the dinosaurs are heavily stylized and cartoonish. It just feels like a strange mixture. Of course, it still tugs at the heartstrings, and there are plenty of laughs, but I was just expecting more, and rightfully so. If you're forced to watch it because of your proximity to children, they'll have a good time, and you won't suffer too much at all. But there's no need to offer to babysit for anyone as an excuse to see this.